Hi, everybody, and welcome to How to Skyrocket Community Engagement using today's most effective technology. Together, we are going to go through this hands-on workshop where we're going to learn how to improve your reputation, even if it's currently awful, improve engagement with community by using today's most cutting-edge technology, and how to keep staff safe, even from lateral violence. Hi there, my name is Laurel Ann Stark. I am the founder of Remarkable Communications. I have been working in communications for almost 20 years now, and over the last 6 years have been working specifically with Indigenous-led organizations and communities to help increase buy-in, help increase engagement with community members, and amplify the important initiatives and stories of Indigenous folks while amplifying and preserving culture and language. My ancestry is half Canadian and half Irish, and while I'm not Indigenous to North America, I do have my own personal healing and decolonization journey that I'm going on, as the same sort of tactics were used on the Irish people as on Indigenous folks here in Canada. And so I'm very, very grateful to be doing this work. So for the last 5 years, I've been working in community, and what I'm sharing here in this presentation are the results of the learnings that we've had working in community over this period of time. So rumors happen. If you are an Indigenous leader running a community organization or an organization that serves communities, you know how these rumors can impact your organization in such a negative way. And today we're going to talk about how to overcome that issue and how to actually convert hostile critics to actually improve your reputation. So we all know the impact of these rumors. I don't need to go into it in too much detail, but it can be quite severe. So resistance to accessing services and programs, resistance to even reaching out to the organization or contacting, that can result in low program engagement, even having to cancel some of the programs. In the case of child and family services organizations, there can often be a mistake or a rumor that it's the same as MCFD, or Ministry of Child and Family Services here in British Columbia. We can see a lot of lateral violence potentially between community members and staff based on misinformation and rumors. And misinformation is just prevalent both online and word of mouth. So if this is what you're dealing with, don't worry. We've got some supports here for you. So why can rumors happen? Not going to skirt the issue. The legacy of colonial harm is a big reason why. The next one is, if we look at sort of folks in society today, we've all got a really short attention span and we've got ad fatigue. The average person is subjected to 3,000 ads a day, and we've all developed mechanisms to sort of block it all out. So the average person needs to actually hear something seven times before they even register that they've heard it. Dealing with a multi-generational audience, everywhere from youth to elders. Not everybody has the same technical engagement or capacity. Some folks are online all the time. Some folks have their own phones and internet connection. Some folks don't. So this can also lead to not necessarily consistent information getting out there. An outdated and incomplete strategy combined with internal capacity limits can also be a bit of a culprit. If we're not consistently reinforcing our story and information about the organization and the benefits and things like that, rumors can sort of take over. And a lot of Indigenous-led organizations do have capacity issues and are growing really fast and don't necessarily have enough staff or staff training to keep up with these new sort of demands. So these are some of the reasons why rumors can happen, but we're gonna deal with it. Okay, so 3 steps to squash rumors. And the very first one is to respond. So if you are getting a lot of rumors and sort of criticism, especially on social media, one of the ways to look at sort of mitigating this is to actually have a response as opposed to reaction, which can be really tricky, especially if there's, attacks, insults, anything personal or emotional in there. I'll get into the detail on how we're going to do that in a second here. But the second step is to reinforce. So to reinforce your own message, reinforce your own storytelling, and reinforce the benefits of working with your organization. And then the third is to repeat. And again, these short attention spans, we need to hear things more than one time in order to be able to actually have that information sink in. So what does responding look like? So these are the 5 steps I learned in nonviolent communication training. And instead of sort of arguing with somebody or trying to convince them of a different way of thinking or viewing things, one of the easiest ways to diffuse the situation is to respond by acknowledging that the person who is upset on your Facebook page has potentially reasons to be upset, to repeat or paraphrase what it is that they're sharing, validate that they have a reason to be upset and angry and afraid. And I mean, I think we all have many reasons for that. And then empathize with where they're coming from. And then the last step is to redirect. So something could look like, hey, I see that you're really angry about the program being canceled. It's an absolutely valid response. It's really unfortunate it had to be canceled, and I can understand the impact on you and your family. And you've got every reason to be upset. Just like agreeing with the person basically. And then the redirection piece is where we're looking at asking people to submit their feedback in a form. Particularly passionate people are really, really great volunteers once you convince them that you're worth their time. So redirecting them potentially to a volunteering form, but basically giving them a place to vent is really, really important, and not on your Facebook comment section. And I'll explain why in detail here in a second. In terms of reinforcing, I want you to think about if you're going to go for lunch and there's two separate restaurants with pretty much the same menu, and one has a massive lineup and one has a tiny little lineup. Which one are you more likely to want to eat at? Well, if you're anything like me, you're going to want to go to the one with the big line. There's a reason that McDonald's has that big sign that says over 1 billion served. It's called social proof, and it's basically because as humans, we don't ever want to be the ones to go first, to be in that tiny lineup and risk like, was this food good or not? We want to go where there's already a lot of other people sort of vetting or saying that this is a good place to eat, because that's basically what's happening when you see that big line. You're like, oh, this must be a good place to eat. Otherwise, why would people line up? So to take that concept and translate it to rumor busting or increasing your reputation or improving your reputation, you can sing from the mountains about how great your organization is yourself, but no one's really going to believe you as much as if you can get other folks to do it as well or for you. So one of the things you want to start sharing consistently on socials and all the places that you have communications are your wins. So what are some, potential case studies? What are some, great news or accomplishments that your organization has accomplished, especially recently? What are some of the stories of your organization? How was it founded? Who founded it? So often these stories aren't shared widely enough, and people have these miscommunications that organizations are led by settlers and colonizers when they're actually Indigenous led. So getting those stories out there is can be really, really, really helpful. Sharing the stories of your people, who works there, what do they do, what are some of their wins and successes, what are some of their stories. And I know there's often a case where some staff don't want to share, and that's completely fine and reasonable. But if you do have a staff or folks that you're working with that are willing to share, this can go a long way to squashing those rumors. Sharing about your culture. So many Indigenous-led organizations have knowledge keepers and elders in there helping with language, to support with mental, emotional health, with cultural protocols. And these things need to be shared, because that really does, again, share and show that these organizations, they do good work, right? And then testimonials. So not everyone can do this, but if there's a case where you've got happy customers or folks who have attended your workshops that are happy, or folks who have worked with you that are happy, see if you can take whatever it is that they said and see if you can share that publicly. And all of these things together can go a really long way to reinforcing your own narrative about what your organization does, the benefits of the organization, the services or programs that are provided, and why someone should actually pick up the phone or walk down there or text or whatever, or engage with you. Moving into repetition. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that when it comes to getting someone to understand what it is that you do, you need to repeat, repeat, repeat. So I challenge you to repeat your message using some of the methods that we just talked about in reinforcement 7 times, 7 ways, in 7 places, and over 7 months. Because building this trust, the sort of changing your reputation from being potentially not that great to one that is great, that's about rebuilding trust with people. And the way to do that is to be consistent over time. So if you repeat your message over and over and over again, and you're seeing the same thing on all these different platforms over a long period of time, people will start to get that message. if you think about Coca-Cola, there's a reason that they still advertise. They don't want you to forget that they're out there. So it's similar to communicating and your communications plan from your internal organization. And this is part of having that sort of consistency, part of having that strategy is thinking about, what are these places that we need to be communicating? What are the ways that we need to be communicating? And how can we do this over a consistent period of time? I would say 7 months is actually the minimum. You'll start to see changes after 7 months, but we start to see real momentum after about a year and a half, 2 years. And that's with organizations that have really a lot of resistance to being contacted, where there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of lateral violence. So it does work. It takes time. So now we're going to move into the worksheet portion of this. You can go to rocketengagement.ca and you can download the worksheet. So the very first question is, what rumors, misinformation, or criticisms are out there about your organization? Just take a couple minutes and just fill out whatever you can. And then how is this information communicated? Are people doing this one-on-one? Is it via messages like over Facebook Messenger or text? Is it email? And then how is your organization responding, reinforcing, and repeating? So we're just going to take a look at, what's actually happening here right now. And potentially you could take these answers to your communications lead, to your manager, to your board of directors, to your executive director, and potentially say, I think we need a communication strategy. And I think we need to look at how we're mitigating these rumors and things like that. So I would go through and fill this out, and then you can actually take this and it can become the template or the beginning stages of your communication strategy. Just in terms of picking a couple of these buckets that you want to do some reinforcement, and a couple of these buckets in terms of where you and your organization are engaging with your audience and repeating your message. So that's the point of this particular worksheet. Okay, so how was that? What was surprising? What was expected, and what did you learn? It can be really, really interesting to do this evaluation of your organization from that communications perspective. And I encourage you to take the answers that you found by doing those worksheets and take it to your executive director or your manager or your director or your board of directors and see if you can start working on more consistent communications in your organization. So now we're going to get into what tools are effective to increase community engagement. How are we getting buy-in? And how to stop hearing from people, I didn't know that, even when you have been promoting your products and your programs and your services consistently and repetitively for yonks. So we'll get into it. I'd love to be able to wave a magic wand and just tell you that Snapchat is going to fix all your problems or TikTok is going to fix all your problems, but that's not necessarily the case. In order to identify what tech tools are the most effective, we need to take your message. So the things we talked about in the reinforcement portion of this workshop, and then we need to look at, who are you trying to talk to? Who do you need to get this message? What is it that you're trying to say specifically? And what is it that you're trying to get them to do? Is it to contact you? Is it to go to your website? Is it to attend a program? Is it to come to a board of directors meeting? Is it to read status update emails? How are you going to get in touch with them? Where do they like to receive communications? And when is the best time to send out these messages? When we start to think about all of these elements, these are the ingredients to effective communication. And so it's different for every organization and it's different for every sort of target that we're trying to reach. So who are you trying to reach? Audiences to consider, and these are some of the audiences that we often engage with at Remarkable Communications, are youth, elders, knowledge holders, leadership, families, folks that are either at home on reserve or away out of the territory in the urban Indigenous population, caregivers. When we think about all of these different audiences, think about how they have different needs, different ways of communicating. I don't know about you, but I have not seen that many elders or knowledge holders that are super active on TikTok. And likewise, I haven't seen that many youth who are checking their physical mail that often. We think about what communication channels are out there. We can start to think about pairing the people that we want to communicate to with the channels that they're most likely open to use. So again, this is going to be different for every single community. I've heard feedback from communities where walkie-talkies are the most effective, or a simple email newsletter is the most effective. Other youth prefer email. Some don't ever use email. So the best thing to do is ask if you can. But these are some of the channels that you can consider using that we've seen to be quite effective. So both email and print newsletters. So the email goes out to everybody who uses email. And the print newsletter goes out to knowledge keepers and holders and folks that aren't necessarily online. SMS and text, we often see really good success using SMS and text with high level leadership that don't have time to be in yet another meeting, and they don't necessarily have time to get to every single email. Facebook and Instagram will reach the majority of people as long as those people are over about 30. Anybody under, they're not on Facebook and Instagram. They're on TikTok, they're on YouTube. Events and contests can really grab the attention of pretty much anyone. Everyone likes to play games, but I will say, if you're going to do a contest on Facebook, make sure that you are not using the word contest because you'll get spammed with about 1,000 bots filling out your form. So you might want to put the word contest in your actual, just like your poster of your event, as opposed to in text. So that's a good little tip. Sitting with and having meals, this is one of the best ways to speak with elders that we found anyway. But again, you want to ask your community members and you want to ask the people that you're trying to communicate with, what's the best way to communicate with them? And then thinking a lot about how our audiences might be affected by accessibility. And this is something I don't think that we talk about enough, but it certainly impacts the folks in our communities. So considering generational factors, capacity factors, both potentially from a neurodiversity perspective, a disability perspective, and also a time perspective. As I mentioned before, leadership sometimes doesn't have the capacity to get to all of their emails. When we think about geographical, are the folks you're trying to communicate with, are they, if they're away from home in the urban Indigenous population, they're going to feel a lot more disconnected than people, back at home. I mentioned neurological issues. There's also FASD, all kinds of other, folks on all kinds of different spectrums that we do want to consider. Sometimes people don't like to or can't read. So sometimes people can't process things verbally. Sometimes they need to see visuals. It all depends on who you're trying to engage with, and just thinking about these accessibility factors can be the difference between getting your message across and not getting your message across. Some folks need childcare and transportation to even be able to consider attending events in person specifically. So we've also seen that offering those two elements can be really, really helpful to increasing engagement. And it's not necessarily a tech tool, but it's something to consider. And then thinking about where they receive information. So these, again, are just some trends that we've seen on predominantly South Vancouver Island in terms of sort of the audiences and the tools that we've seen are effective. But again, I encourage you to do your own research. So youth tend to be on TikTok and YouTube. They tend to really like animated videos. Everyone likes food and fun events. Contests and games can be really, really effective as well. Coloring pages. We've also done a planner for a child and family services organization where it's essentially a planner targeted towards it's youth, but it's sort of older youth transitioning out of care to help them basically plan their day, plan their job, plan their education, and all the things they need to organize, but also keeping them connected to culture. So it ends up being like a physical book in their hands. Interactive QR codes we've also seen on signage. It has been really effective in order to get folks to go from offline to online. Youth tend to really want to go online, so we found that that's quite effective. When it comes to knowledge keepers and elders, often this demographic is a little bit older. They don't necessarily want to be online or have, as much screen time as potentially youth. So we find one-on-one is much more effective. Sitting with printed materials like word search books, we've done it in Hulkaminum, Lekwungen, and Senchothan, can be really helpful. To the door delivery, email, these are all sort of ways that we found to be quite effective with knowledge keepers and elders. And then in terms of leadership, I have mentioned this a couple times, but text messages, audio messages we've seen to be quite effective. They're also in keeping with the strong oral tradition of the Salish culture. This is sort of like a mini podcast where leadership can listen to audio updates as they're doing other things, which can make it really effective and efficient. Printed sort of scannable reports. So they aren't like a ton of text. It's kind of like a magazine where it's a lot of photos and graphics and things like that to make the information more digestible. So they don't have to feel like, oh no, I've got to sit and read this report. More like, oh, what's this? One-on-ones, of course, email, and then gatherings and food can generally appeal to pretty much everyone. And then in terms of families and parents, it does depend on how busy and what's the capacity of these families and parents. So again, you want to ask your community members, but here's some ways that we've seen have been effective. SMS and text message, audio message, of course, fun events, contests, and games. To the door delivery is often helpful when folks may be too busy to, be on social media or catch up on their emails. We see a lot on Facebook Messenger as well. Gatherings and food, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It depends on the demographics as well. Are we talking younger parents or older parents, or there's so many different factors. And then in terms of away from home, usually the email newsletter, again, depending on the demographics, can be really helpful, but also a printed newsletter just for backup and for folks who aren't necessarily online or have email addresses. Social media tends to be much more important for folks who are away from home. And again, a bunch of different ways like fun events, contest games, etc. To the door delivery. Messenger, again, features predominantly for this audience. And then in terms of caregivers, again, specifically for child and family services organizations, caregivers often, unfortunately, end up being settlers. So getting in front of this particular audience, social media is really helpful. But we've also seen printed ads, printed newsletters, billboards to be quite effective here. Fun events, contest games, gathering foods, always work. And then staff is an audience that we don't always talk about, but sometimes staff don't even know what's going on in the organization because they're siloed, like they're working in this one department and these guys over here are doing this, these amazing things, and these are doing these amazing things, and they don't know about each other's work. So in this way, we can text folks on their work phones and let them know, hey, here's the weekly newsletter or the monthly newsletter. Here's all the accomplishments happening. Here's what's going on our social media. And then often we have contests and games as well to get staff to submit photos and all kinds of fun stuff. So now it's time for our next worksheet. Here we're going to do a similar thing. And again, the idea is that we're going to hope to give you sort of an analysis of where your communications are right now and to give you some sort of tasks or actionable steps that you can take right away to either action yourself, take to your manager, take to your director, take to your board of directors, et cetera, to apply to your existing communication strategy. And I just want to say, if you don't have a communication strategy or if you don't have communication support, if you are one of those organizations that is growing and you don't have a specific communications person or folks with enough training, we are super happy to help you at Remarkable Communications. We only work with Indigenous organizations, and we've been doing so for over 6 years. We've got a team of over 20 people now, versed in all areas of communications. And I personally would love to chat with you. So if you would like to book a call with me, there'll be a link to do so at the end here. So just wanted to put that out there. But otherwise, we're just going to go through the who, the what, the how, the where, and basically taking a look at how your communications are performing in terms of how to increase that engagement. Like, what tools are you using? Have you factored in accessibility? What audiences are you trying to reach? And then once that's done, we're going to get back to the next part of the presentation. But first, I'm going to ask you, how was that? What was surprising? What was expected or unexpected? What did you learn? The goal of these worksheets is to make it so that way you have, takeaways from this workshop. So that way it's actually going to help you, today or tomorrow take some actionable steps. So I wonder, out of the 2 worksheets that you've already started, what are some things you could start working on right now? And what are you going to, take to potentially your manager or executive director or board of directors to work on? So the last part is keeping your staff safe from lateral violence. So we know lateral violence happens. I've talked about it a little bit already in this presentation. It happens one-on-one with staff. It happens on Facebook. It happens in community. And what are the causes? Of course, ongoing colonial harm. Colonization is not in the past. It's still right here with us. And I read a post by an Indigenous woman the other day saying that it's funny that they call it lateral violence when we adopt the behavior of the colonizer, and we just call it lateral violence, which I thought was really apt. So of course, it's still ongoing. It creates this culture of mistrust. And some of the other causes are that there's not all organizations have a clear strategy to manage what we can. And I think this is a really important differentiation, because we can't solve lateral violence overnight. I would be silly to say that that's what we're going to do here today for the rest of this presentation. I have very limited experience, but I want to share the results of the experience that I have in terms of what can work and what can be helpful. Again, managing what we can manage. We could spend 3 weeks talking about this, and I don't know that we would ever solve it. To be honest, I think it's a work in progress, and it's about being iterative. improving what we can, day over day. So I just want to acknowledge that, as a settler, of course, I don't have the broad experience around this, but I just want to share what I can in the hopes that it'll be helpful. So some of the strategies that we've seen that are helpful on managing lateral violence are policies, behaviors, and then some resources. And then I've got some quick wins for you, some things that you can start doing right now to sort of mitigate those harmful comments, especially on social media. So the word policy, not really my favorite either, and I know a lot of people sort of cringe at them, but policies can be really, really helpful in order to establish sort of a boundary around what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So having some rules, a lot of band offices will have, a list or just a sign that says like any sort of yelling, insults, abuse will not be tolerated and you'll be asked to leave. So that's a rule, right? Um, so having some sort of idea of what the rules are in your organization around lateral violence. And then with those rules, there should generally be consequences. So boundaries, I think of as like a hula hoop. So when I talk about boundaries, I talk about like what my choices are. So for example, one of my boundaries is if someone is raising their voice at me and yelling at me and calling me names, like I leave. I'm not gonna stay in a conversation like that. So that's not to do with the other person. Like they can do what they want. And I think that's a really important differentiator because we can't control other people. We can only control how we respond. And then letting our staff know what our sort of policies are around this sort of thing. So if someone yells at you what to do, and I know this can be really, really tricky, especially if we're looking at residential school survivors who may also be elders and knowledge keepers. And, it's not very respectful to walk away. So I think this is something that needs to be brought back to community leadership and needs to be brought back to community and to look in the culture and find out, how do we deal with this from a like a culturally resonant perspective. But I think that we can take the lessons from these stories and from the folks who have the language and they have some of the original stories and to ask what are the lessons, what are the natural laws and the laws from our culture and how they inform our policies and rules and boundaries and consequences. So again, I don't have the full answers, but I think that having some guidelines around how to manage can be really helpful, especially on Facebook, for example. We often will have rules and policies where we're blocking people when if we're not doing the response thing that I talked about earlier. But yeah, figuring out some sort of policy, communicating it to your staff, and ensuring that there's some sort of consequences and some sort of way that they know it's okay to behave, whether it's leaving or not responding or maybe not engaging with that person anymore. And again, I know it's tricky, but even a first draft would be helpful rather than not having anything. So helpful behaviors, and this is some stuff you can use to support your staff, showing them how to do the response versus reactions. That's that nonviolent communications, and just how to hold space for someone that's hurting. And a lot of lateral violence is about people that are afraid and angry, and they've got every right to be afraid and angry. But how do we navigate that and stay safe ourselves, right? So diffusing the situation is a really good sort of priority. So using that nonviolent communication, mirroring, empathizing, validating, and redirecting that energy can be really helpful. It doesn't work all the time, but it's better than nothing. And I think training our staff on how to use these tools can be quite helpful. And then in terms of resources, making sure staff and basically anybody who's engaging with anybody really, where's the policy manual? What are some behavior trainings that potentially we could use around like nonviolent communication? Or there's so many different workshops on lateral violence that are put together and facilitated by Indigenous leaders. And I think it's a great idea to resource those. I have a couple resources if you need them, so let me know. Post-event support, like if there is an incident, are there resources for someone to reach out to? Like, is there counseling? Are there cultural supports there and available? Are there elders that they can talk to? Just sort of having all this laid out preventatively before something happens, and then training people and making sure they know how to take advantage of these resources can be really, really helpful as well. So copy paste responses. I wanted to share these with you. So again, these are put together by a white girl. And then what I really recommend that you do is to please go ahead and augment them for your own community. So what I've got here is providing some helpful policies and basically just circling anything in this worksheet that you do have already or that maybe you need to start working on. So at our organization, we have these policies, we have these helpful behaviors, we have these resources. And then, what could we be doing better and what are we doing well? So that's the worksheet for this particular section. But I also wanted to share with you in this folder, we have the bonus file of copy paste responses. And this is what I mean about the responses from a white lady. So these are some sort of templates that you can use to respond to people who are critical or engaging in lateral violence on social media. I would again encourage you to take this back to your community and whoever is going to provide input on these things, and make sure it's appropriate for your own culture and for your own community and for your own organization. But I always find it's better to get something that I need to edit than to start from scratch. So these are some copy paste responses that you can start using right away to respond to folks that are based on that nonviolent communication framework that I was sharing about earlier. So my hope is that you can take this and start using this right away. But again, I would say just vet it with whoever you need to at your organization. And then getting back to our workshop here. So just as an overview, we explored improving your reputation, improving engagement, and keeping your staff safe. I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to go through this interactive workshop. Again, my name is Laurel Stark. I am with Remarkable Communications. If you want support with your communications, you want to talk about how we could help, please let me know. You can click remarkablecommunications.com at any point, and you can book a call with us and book a chat. And I just want to thank you so much for your time. Yeah, the work it's difficult, and I just want to acknowledge that you're doing it. And just by attending this presentation, I just want to say that I really acknowledge the work that you're doing. It's not easy, and yeah, it's a privilege to do this work. And if you need any support, please let me know. I'm happy to be here and to help you and your organization with achieving your objectives. Thank you so much.